Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Neha Dewan, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Operations and General Counsel here at Indiaspora. And I'm joining you today from India, which feels like exactly the right place to be having this conversation. Being here in India, it is evident that it sits at the center of an extraordinarily global reimagination. Relationships between nations, between diasporas, and between longstanding partners are all being reshaped in real time. And Canada and India are no exception. For those of you who may not be familiar, Indiaspora is a nonprofit organization focused on harnessing the collective power of the global Indian diaspora to be a force for good. We were founded in the US and have a full-time office now present in India. We are also very active in the UK, Singapore, Australia, UAE, and of course, Canada. Our work centers around philanthropy, civic engagement, social impact, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And our vision is to ultimately become the Davos and the Aspen of the global Indian. We've been deeply engaged in Canada since 2018, partnering with leading diaspora leaders, government stakeholders, and institutions such as Global Affairs Canada, the Canada-India Business Council, Canada-India Foundation, among others, all to identify meaningful areas of collaboration. What sets us apart is that we are intentionally not siloed. We are not a trade, cultural, or faith organization. Rather, we pride ourselves on bringing together leaders across diasporas, industries, professions, and geographies. In fact, we just wrapped up a very successful second annual Global Forum and AI Summit in Bangalore last week, where we convened the diaspora from over 20 countries, discussing a wide variety of topics. It was an incredibly energizing few days, including a keynote from Prem Watsa, a longtime Indiaspora member and supporter of our work. At Indiaspora, our mission is simple but powerful: to build community, catalyze change, and convene the right people around the conversations that matter the most. Tonight is one of those conversations. I'll turn it over to my colleague, the Executive Director of Indiaspora, Sanjeev Joshipura, who will also chair this session. Over to you, Sanjeev.
Thank you. Thanks, Neha. And really looking forward to this event. We have an outstanding set of panelists that I will introduce very shortly. Just to very briefly set the stage before I get into the introductions. As all of you know, the Canada-India relationship in the recent past has been turbulent, but it is now looking up. And observers of the relationship say that the new government under Mark Carney, Prime Minister Carney in Canada, is taking a more pragmatist, business-oriented, geopolitically savvy approach in its relationship with India, driven perhaps partly by the desire for rapprochement with India, but also perhaps because of the unpredictability emanating from Canada's southern neighbor. Everybody that I have spoken with in India, who are well-wishers of the Canada-India relationship, have said wistfully, and several of them exasperatedly, "Oh, Canada," in the past, and not in the context that my Canadian friends would appreciate, given that that is the title of their beautiful national anthem. But now, things are changing. In the past, when I spoke with even prominent Indo-Canadians resident in Canada, while they were not entirely absolving India of blame in the manner in which India handled the bilateral relationship, they did have serious questions about Canada's approach. Canada, of course, has a proud tradition of free speech enshrined in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It also has a very strong internationalist tradition. From India's perspective, Canada was getting that balance wrong in the past. Canada, of course, felt differently under Prime Minister Trudeau, based on what it viewed as foreign interference in its law and order internal situation. But to unpack all of this and more, we will have a panel in terms of how we got here and its prognosis in the future in the bilateral relationship. I will say, just as a matter of context, that Indiaspora has been proud and delighted to play a small role as a well-wisher in the bilateral relationship by participating in various events with our partners, such as Fairfax Financial Holdings and the Canada-India Business Council, among others, participating in events in back-channel conversations where we have talked about how the diaspora can perhaps help transcend the negativity in the relationship that existed until very recently. Anyway, we've turned over a new leaf and we will talk about the future now. So let me introduce my panelists. I'll start with Veena Najibullah, who is joining us from Vancouver. She is the Vice President of Research and Strategy at the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. She has a global background in multilateral organizations, nonprofits, and philanthropies in Africa, Canada, USA, China, and Central Asia. Her focus in her research is on the Canada-India relationship, the Canada-China relationship, and indeed Canada's conceptualization of the Indo-Pacific. She's also an adjunct professor at the University of British Columbia School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. Our next panelist is Goldy Hyder. He's joining us from Ottawa. Goldy is President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. Formerly, he used to be CEO of Hill and Knowlton, and he also used to be Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Joe Clark. On the philanthropic side, he has been the co-chair of the United Way of Ottawa and the chair of the Ottawa Senators Foundation. He is also a former board member at Carleton University, and I'm proud to say he's an Indiaspora member. Last but not least, we are joined by Nadir Patel, also in Ottawa. Nadir is a senior strategic advisor at Norton Rose Fulbright, a managing director at Fairfax Financial Holdings, a corporate director at Canadian Tire, the chair of Jumpstart Charities, and the chancellor of Wilfrid Laurier University. Very importantly, he used to be the High Commissioner of Canada to India and its ambassador to Nepal and Bhutan. Proud to say that he's also an Indiaspora member. Veena, let me start with you, and I do encourage, like I was saying in the pre-show, that I do want this to be a very, very conversational event. All of you have a tremendous breadth of expertise, and I know that in addition to the question that I will lead with, that you will have things to say perhaps about what each other has said already. So please feel free to get into a conversation. I'll do 2 rounds of questions for each of you, starting with Veena, then going to Goldy, and then going to Nadir. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers with our audience, many of whom have joined us on Zoom, and perhaps some that will ask questions from the live stream, where this event is being live streamed on various Indiaspora platforms. Veena, let me start with you. Geopolitically, how does Canada see India now, given the change in the government in Canada? Does Canada center its Eastern Hemisphere engagement around the concept of an Indo-Pacific region? And given Mark Carney's speech in Davos recently, where he talked about middle powers, how much do you think Canada, a middle power like Canada, factors in India's geopolitical calculus? You've written, Veena, about principled pragmatism. How does that show up in the bilateral relationship between Canada and India?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sanjeev. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be joining you. My first event with Indiaspora, and I hope not the last one. And a pleasure to be with Goldy and Nadir on this panel, and look forward to the discussion. So you asked a really big question, but I think it's the right place to start to look at Canada's overall foreign policy under Prime Minister Carney's leadership. In the year that he has been in power, he is redefining how Canada engages with the world and how Canada sees itself as a middle power, as you rightly pointed out. So, and he articulated that vision of his foreign policy with his Davos speech, now famous Davos speech, where he essentially spoke about the fact that in the world of rupture, where everything is changing and hegemons, both US and China, behaving in ways that undermine rules-based order that we have come to depend on, that countries like Canada need to focus on their own economic resilience and build partnerships with other trusted countries and relationships that are not necessarily focused on old alliances and old clubs, but actually are much more fit for purpose in today's world. So, and India is very much part of that, which is why from the beginning, very early in his tenure as the Prime Minister, he made a deliberate choice to rebuild the relationship, which was at a very low point last year. His invitation to Prime Minister Modi to attend the G7 meeting, I think, began that reset, which really, in a span of a year, has fundamentally transformed where we were with India and our relationship and the potential moving forward. So I think And that is very much part of this pragmatic foreign policy that's focused on economic partnerships, that's focused on building resilience, that's focused on finding areas where we can cooperate and also managing differences in a different way. So not through megaphone diplomacy, not necessarily through public statements, but in a constructive way that allows still those issues to be addressed. And there are still issues in the relationship with India, but there are channels now that are dealing with them. So I think writ large, to kind of answer your question also on the Indo-Pacific, while the Prime Minister doesn't often speak about Indo-Pacific as a geography, I think he sees its importance, and that's why he has traveled to the region extensively, including recently, just a month ago, to India, Australia, and Japan. He sees the region as fundamental to our economic prosperity, to technology, to green transition, all of the issues that matter, AI. So we will see a lot more from Canada in the region, including with India. But also, like I said, with Japan and with Australia, the trilateral that you referenced earlier in your remarks also will be something that we should consider. So I hope that's enough to get you going, and happy to come back in the second round.
Thank you, Veena. I appreciate that. A great sort of stage setting and opening. Goldy, let me turn to you. Given your vantage point as a key strategist and a leader and a spokesperson in Canada's business landscape, both domestically and internationally, let me turn to trade and foreign direct investment. The annual goods trade between Canada and India is somewhere in between, let's say, $10 to $12 billion United States dollars right now. But there is an ambitious target that both countries have talked about by 2030, reaching $50 billion, with a potential trade agreement should that fructify. There are also very important trading partnerships at a subnational level. There are lots of Canadian provincial premiers who have visited India, their trade ministers, and a lot of these delegations go back and forth. So my question for you is, where do we go from here on trade? That's one. And related to that, just in terms of the economic relationship between the two countries, what are you foreseeing in terms of foreign direct investment by Canadian companies in India, not just from a manufacturing perspective, but also from a pension fund and private equity perspective, talking about the Brookfields and the CDPQs and the Omers of the world?
Well, Sanjeev, let me also start and add my appreciation to you and the Indiaspora team for the leadership that you provide on an ongoing basis. And what a pleasure it is to see some familiar faces in the audience, and even bigger pleasure to be here with my dear friends Veena and Nadir, both of whom are going to show you the depth of their understanding of this issue far more than I am. But let me just add it from the lens of the business community, which you've asked me to do. To pick up on where Veena started is the importance of the reset. And when you work for chief executives, what you realize very quickly is a tone is set at the top. And when you have two prime ministers who've decided that they're going to really embark in a different direction, it's going to happen. Everybody lines up behind you. The system lines up. Doesn't matter what your points of view are on any of this. Everybody's aligned. There can be no doubt. There's no resistance to that relationship being reset the way that it currently is. I will say that Veena calls it principled pragmatism. I use the phrase strategic pragmatism because principle can be small p, big P. Really what's happened here is we're putting the emphasis on the syllable of interests over values. We're not setting values aside. We believe in democracy, rule of law, free trade, et cetera, but we're really leaning in with interest, which is the segue to trade, because we've been talking about trade for a very, very long time. Nadir will know the journey far better than I do, but certainly, before the events of a few years ago in September, when the Prime Minister made the announcement that he did in Parliament, that really severed the relationship in a very dramatic way, and we wondered how long it would take to get back to it. There was a sense that all that had been achieved at that time will be lost. And we spent a lot of time talking was being the key word. We talked about a full agreement. We talked about a trade investment agreement. We talked about something called the early progress trade agreement. We were making up stuff just to try and figure out a way to get the bilateral relationship to go to the next level. And then everything just stopped. I want to acknowledge both the government of Canada and the government of India at that time. I was literally to leave on a mission to India that month, and both ministers, Goel and Minister Ng at the time, sent clear indication to the business community on both sides. Look, we would prefer that you don't get embroiled in all of this stuff. I kind of described it in the newspaper as mom and dad are having a fight. It doesn't mean the kids need to suffer. And so you stay in your lane, you maintain your relationships, you continue to do what you need to do on a B2B level. And I think that wisdom is important because it allows us to hit the ground running now. Those relations from a business to business community were not strained. We were fully engaged. We continued to operate, and we did so respectful and mindful of the fact that very serious allegations had been made, and there's a judicial process and a legal process and a diplomatic political process in separate lanes that will work its way through. But in the business community, we think we're in a better shape today to pick up on the trade discussions. But a number of things have happened, right? Very quickly, when America changes, the rest of the world changes with it. That's just how it works. And so I think you're seeing evidence of that nowhere more so than in India, quite frankly, a naturally protectionist country, not a free trading nation, did not have many free trading agreements, very difficult to get in and actually have the deep systemic conversations on a variety of sectors. Suddenly, out of nowhere, deal with the UK, deal with Australia, deal with America, deal with the EU. Talk about two protectionist entities coming together pretty quickly. So you can see the consequences of the change that America has triggered to say to people, hey, whatever your points of view are, we're in a whole new world, and you're going to have to move quickly, and you're going to have to make choices that you may have not wanted to make before. So I think from that perspective, we're in a much better place to believe that when two leaders tell their trade negotiators, as they have, we want a deal by the end of this year. I was in India with Prime Minister Carney and a delegation from the Business Council a short while ago, where we met with Prime Minister Modi, Prime Minister Carney at a CEO summit. And you could tell that they're determined to drive this thing through, which is important. But there is still the process of trade negotiations that one needs to go through. And what is interesting will be what makes the cut and what doesn't make the cut. Already we're being told you probably won't have an investment protection agreement. You're being told, look at the other agreements. We didn't put an egg on the table. So there may be some carve-outs over time that may minimize the full breadth and scope of the agreement. So we need to monitor that very carefully. Second point you asked me about was, the FDI and the two ways. So what's interesting is you said one way. You said from Canada to India. I'd like to point out that our Prime Minister's primary motive to traveling is the other way. This is a person who has the Rolodex, as he does, and has proven it in India. It was, went to see Mr. Ambani with Diana, his wife, and they were at the home. They did all the things that you would normally do with a relationship. And I will bet anything that there will be an investment from Reliance not too far into the future here in Canada. What it is, and we shall see, and where it and what sector it is, but it will happen. Because the Prime Minister is putting an emphasis on trying to attract up to $1 trillion in the next 5 years, which is a third of our GDP from all around the world. And that's why he's been on the road as much as anyone. I'm right behind him usually, or right with him in many cases, because we are now diversifying in a way in which we've never really had to do before. So tremendous opportunities for Indian businesses to think about investing in India. And of course, there's a lot of history of Canadian businesses that have invested in India, starting with our pension funds, but much more. The challenge is this, and Nadir can pick up on this point, but so much of it has been about services. It's the insurance industry, it's the pension funds, it's the engineering companies, it's the technology companies, a lot of services oriented. What we need to do is make sure that India can make things, and we should also make sure that the things that Canada has that India wants, we can get it to them. And that brings you to the issue of trade enabling infrastructure, which may be a subject for a discussion at a later point in the conversation. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Goldy. Very, very comprehensive. Nadir, as Goldy alluded to, there is no aspect of the India-Canada relationship that you cannot comment on. So feel free to comment on questions I've already asked. But as far as you're concerned, let me ask you one question to get us started. And that is pertaining to the diaspora. The Indian diaspora's influence in Canadian politics, but not just in politics, in business and in other fields, in arts, culture, sports, etc. We have seen that influence and their visibility increasing over time. But we know that it's a complicated space. In the recent past, given the downturn in India-Canada relations, Like I said before, the diaspora largely is very well-meaning and wants to have better relations and strong relations between the two countries. But in some way, the diaspora or a segment thereof was also a cause, perhaps, of the problems in the relationship. Now, as we also know, an increasing number of students from India keep coming into Canada year after year. And so, my question for you is, what do you see the diaspora's role being in strengthening, hopefully, relations between the two countries as we move forward? But what do you also see as the complications that arise from there?
Well, first of all, let me just jump in and say thank you for this opportunity. It's fantastic, and thank you for starting me off with a very easy question to answer. You couldn't think of anything a bit more complicated than that. I'm gonna answer it a little bit. I do want to maybe tie it back to some of the comments that have already been raised and add a couple of dimensions. So with respect to the diaspora, I think whether it's India or any other country, there's no doubt that the diaspora brings something very special that allows a relationship, a bilateral relationship, to flourish, to deepen, to become a lot more than trade, investment, and driven by trade and foreign policy interests. And the same goes with respect to the diaspora, Indian diaspora in Canada as well. But at the same time, when you think a little bit about, I think the diaspora will no doubt have an impact, whether it's India or any other bilateral relationship. The question is, to what extent is that impact, right? And we talk about influence, we talk about visibility, but I would talk about impact. And when you talk a little bit about the trade numbers, going from 13 billion to 50 billion, which is the target over the coming years, some of the stats that Goldy has indicated just around two-way investment and whatnot, I would argue that much of that is regardless of the diaspora. When we talk about pension funds, investors, trade, back and forth, it's not driven by the diaspora. The diaspora links, I think, are there to provide a lot more depth and breadth to the relationship. But as you already pointed out, it could be a significant asset, but also could create challenges as well. So now, it's not about the diaspora creating a challenge or an opportunity for a relationship. At the end of the day, whether it's business, whether it's government, it's how they respond or leverage the diaspora community to grow the relationship. And I think what we've seen under Prime Minister Carney, and I think Veena touched on this, is that this government has decided that foreign and trade policy interests will drive this relationship first and foremost, and not diaspora interests or diaspora politics. And that is a fundamental shift from what we've seen over the last decade and moving forward to this government. One thing I wanted to raise in addition to what Veena had set out is, having been appointed by Prime Minister Harper, then reappointed by the Trudeau government, and seeing where things are at now, I firmly believe that things are very different today than they were over the last decade plus in terms of the backdrop, the opportunity to achieve some significant momentum in the relationship. And when you touch on wanting to triple or quadruple trade over the next, several years, I would not have said this a year or two ago, but today I actually believe it is very achievable. And going back to Goldy's comments around a trade agreement, can that be done within a year or by the end of the year? Goldy and I talked about this quite often. A couple of years ago, I would have said, no, it would not have been possible. Today, I say the backdrop is very different. Why is that? Well, first of all, you have Prime Minister Carney, who, regardless of the backdrop of the geopolitical environment, made it very clear coming in that we must have a robust relationship with India and China and others as well. So, that leadership has been driving a lot of the change. Similarly, on the Indian side, there is this incredible respect that Prime Minister Modi and his team have for Prime Minister Carney, not just in terms of bilateral intention. In an op-ed,
I would share some of the data, but
oh, sorry, Nadir, go ahead.
That's okay.
Yeah.
The second reason why I think it's very different this time is, as you already pointed out, the Trump impact, whether it's in India, whether it's with Canada. There's never been a more important time to leverage your partnerships outside of the US in a way where you can achieve some mutual impact and synergies. And we have a lot to offer India. India has a lot to offer us. Everything we've talked about, critical minerals, energy, agri. There's a lot of different sectors that we see eye to eye on. And so that's stimulating, some change. And then in addition to that, you touched on some of the challenges in the relationship, the security related challenges. Now, there is a path forward to navigate some of that. Some of that's navigated through the legal system, but that challenging situation the last couple of years has in fact brought Canada and India closer together in many respects. Our security agencies are in discussion and collaborating in ways that we haven't seen in a very long time, if at all. So I think there's a mutual desire to drop the diaspora politics, appreciate what the diaspora has to offer, but not drive the relationship from what the diaspora is bringing to the table, and drive it from what's in the best interests beyond the diaspora for both countries. The only other comment I'll make is, at least to set things up a little bit, is organizations like Indiaspora is a really good example where you have an opportunity to strengthen the initiatives that are already in play. A diplomatic engagement, political engagement is really, really important, but it's not enough on its own. So the diaspora does play, and other organizations like Indiaspora do play a very important role in reinforcing opportunities, reinforcing intelligence and information around where to focus efforts and why these efforts matter. I'll stop there for a moment just to pick up on some of the comments that have been made.
Thank you, Nadir. Appreciate your remarks and comments as well. I will come back to you, like I said, for a second round, which I'll begin right now with Veena again. Veena, our other speakers touched upon this a little bit, but I want to dive a little deeper into the geopolitics of energy. That is being upended right now as we speak, given all the activities and events going on in the Middle East, not to mention Russia and Ukraine. My question for you is, how poised is Canada to be an energy partner for India? Energy is something that Canada has and can export. Energy is something that India wants and needs to import from various nations, from various sources. And related to that question, I have another question. Is Canada well poised to get energy from Alberta, from its tar sands to its own coasts for onward exporting and shipment onto India and other countries?
Great. Happy to respond to that. But if I may, just a couple of small points on what has already been said by my colleagues. I think on the diaspora point, I completely agree with Nadir that it is great that Prime Minister Carney is moving away from relying on kind of diaspora politics and focusing much more on national interest and on discussions around what India and Canada need to be doing on economic partnerships, maritime partnerships, energy partnerships. That is fantastic. But we should also still note that while the political atmosphere has changed, the political will is there. We're moving quickly, even on the CEPA discussion by standards of such things. The first round of CEPA negotiations already took place. So I think on the diplomatic political track, things are going well. On the economic track, things are going well. And Goldy mentioned that they were already progressing even without the reset. And I think now we'll move even faster. I think things on the law enforcement and security track are also moving, perhaps not as fast as others. The area where we still have a big gap is in public perception, especially here in Canada. There's still a deficit in understanding and trust. And I think it's largely because people understand these issues from a very narrow perspective of just one community, one segment of one community, rather than the broader interests of the diversity of the Indo-Canadian diaspora. So I think to the extent that that still is an issue that we should be paying attention to, it's about making sure that in the public discourse, there's an understanding that the community is growing and very diverse and pluralistic, representing the pluralism of India and also of Canada, and cannot be reduced to the interest of one simple one group. So I think, and that kind of public education work, the raising of understanding and competence and building mutual trust, I think needs to continue in parallel to underpin the reset that's happened under the leadership of the two prime ministers. So I think that's an important point. On the energy, you're absolutely right. There is a tremendous amount of opportunity in the sector. Canada, under, again, Prime Minister Carney's leadership, is unabashedly now claiming its energy superpower status, recognizing that we have a lot of both conventional energy resources, but also that we want to play in the clean energy value chain as well, and supply chains, especially around critical minerals. So I think if you look at the outcome of Prime Minister Carney's visit, one of the biggest commercial deals was in fact a uranium supply deal, a multi-year deal, which is the kind of thing that we want to see because again, it anchors the relationship and builds trust. And it's something that, a $2.8 billion deal. With uranium. We've also seen early discussions and a number of MOUs on critical minerals, which I think is really important. India, of course, is very rich when it comes to critical minerals, but has not traditionally had a strong mining sector for various reasons, including a location of where these resources are found. So I think Canada has a lot to offer, both in terms of know-how, skills on the mining side. There's also obviously the very immediate need when it comes to the crisis in the Middle East. But here, I think we have to be realistic around export infrastructure, a point that Goldy made, that while we now have, for the first time, because of LNG Canada, an opportunity to export to Asian markets, that facility, which is here in British Columbia, is almost at capacity now. There is a second phase, and I think that's something that should be of interest, hopefully, to India. When it comes to oil, of course, it's still majority of it goes south, and then from the U.S. Gulf, it goes to the global markets. We have TMX pipeline, which again, for the first time, allows us to get our oil to Asian markets, but the numbers that are currently going to India are very small. Now, historically, that had been a reason because India is very price sensitive, but now, of course, with what's happening in the Middle East, we can see that price is not really the only thing that one should be concerned about. There needs to be diversity of supply. You can't be as reliant on the Gulf energy as India has found itself to be. So I think moving forward, there will be a lot more opportunity because Canada is really stepping into this role of being a reliable provider of energy to partners in Asia and in Europe. We're doing everything possible to get our resources through LNG Canada, through TMX pipeline to Asia, but the numbers are still small. I mean, the overwhelming majority is still going to the US for reasons of infrastructure, and infrastructure takes time to build. But this is where also we can have attraction of Indian investment into Canadian major projects, which will allow us to get our resources to market. So I think there's a ton of opportunity. But what excites me about this is that it's a full spectrum opportunity, both conventional as well as clean energy. These are multi-year projects that could, again, anchor the relationship as we're building a much more robust economic partnership. Because while we've all mentioned all the opportunities, so far the trade numbers between our two countries are fairly modest. A lot of it has been in the educational sector, which is now changing and it's going down. So we're kind of facing this challenge. We want to double trade by 2030 at the same time, like the services portion of that trade, which was really education driven, is actually going down, right? So we need to be looking at other sectors. And to me, energy, both clean and conventional, is that area where we could find a lot of opportunity. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Veena. And just as other speakers have mentioned, on the energy piece of it as well, one sees evidence of a much more pragmatic approach by the Carney government as compared to the Trudeau government. One can like or dislike the pragmatism, but it is indeed more pragmatic.
Well, and absolutely. And I think actually Goldy and I agree. When I say principled pragmatism, it doesn't mean that both sides of that equation are equal. It's just that we're not fully abandoning our principles because, again, this is Canada. And when it comes to issues around energy, we still have to negotiate with First Nations. We still have to deal with the provincial issues. So while Prime Minister Carney may choose to move quickly, there are still some elements that need to be dealt with, and it's not as simple as just sort of declaring that we now will open up all of our resources and build all the pipelines and so forth. So there's still values and stakeholders to be managed, while obviously there's a change in tone and change in policy as well. It's more than a tone change between the two Liberal governments.
Right. Goldy, let me turn to another subject. Does Canada benefit in the war for global talent, in the race for global talent, whether it's in the tech space, in the healthcare space, STEM talent from India? Does Canada benefit given the tightening restrictions on immigration in the United States? Canada also is gradually beginning to tighten some immigration rules, partly because of housing affordability in some of its larger cities. And also, we know that regardless of the immigration restrictions in the United States, Silicon Valley still has a magnetic pull for technology entrepreneurs and venture capitalists and so on and so forth from India. So my question for you is, does Canada have the ecosystem in place that it can indeed benefit from tightening immigration restrictions that the United States is imposing?
I'll answer that question, but I'm going to come back to energy and diaspora if I can at the other end of it, just very quickly.
Of course.
So the short answer to this is we should be able to, but we're not going to be able to. For a number of reasons. We have our own immigration crisis underway here in Canada right now. One of the most alarming things I can tell you in the C-suites today is the loss of consensus of immigration in Canada. The issues that quickly overwhelmed it around affordability, crime, gridlock, and the scapegoating that goes on. It's always someone else's fault. Immigrants are at the front of that line saying, yeah, shut the doors. Like, I'm not opposed to immigration, but like, I don't want any more for the next 10 years or whatever. Thing is, our economy has only grown because of population growth. Our GDP growth has only happened over population. In fact, we shrunk 100,000 people last year. So you would think that we would be looking to take advantage of that. Of course, there's going to be natural people who are going to apply and want to come here, and academics and others. I have an anecdotal example where there was a lab that had decided that we're not going to stay in the United States anymore. It had about 8 to 12 researchers or so the case was. Canadians identified it, started the conversations, went through the rigmarole that Canadian processes do. We were talking. Next thing you know, everything went radio silent. Well, guess what happened? By the time we were talking, UAE came in, picked up the whole lab, picked up everybody, moved them all to the UAE, funded it fully, moved the people, gave them accommodations, and we're still left wondering what just happened. And so the speed at which that kind of labor, the one that's sought after, that's elite, that's exclusive, will move quickly. And so you have to be ready to move quickly. And that's not one of the things that we're known for in our immigration system. So that's the answer to that question. But I want to come back to a couple very quickly on a couple of things.
Yeah.
On energy, as an Albertan, let me just say how refreshing it is to see the facts yet again reemerge at the center of the table. It's what I've been saying for a decade. You're not entitled to your own facts. Right. And eventually those facts are going to catch up to you. And they have. And by the way, they caught up to Mr. Trudeau, who had to nationalize a pipeline to get it completed, who approved LNG Canada, who approved other LNG projects. Despite all the rhetoric around the climate, the reality is Canada, Canadian companies, have nothing to apologize for anyone in the world about our standards on corporate social responsibility, on our role in the environment, and the progress that we have made, significant progress with Indigenous reconciliation, but more to do on the political side, but from a business to business side. A lot of partnerships are taking place, including equity stakes, reskilling a workforce, educating a workforce. So a lot of good things are happening. I'm actually leaving for London for next week, the conference, to help the LSX understand that Canada is an investable place in energy, and that a lot of progress is actually all about Indigenous. There's a lot of progress here. We brought in a special program that we were one of the lead proponents for called the Indigenous Loan Guarantees to help them be able to provide capital and basically to help de-risk investment partnerships, and just in case they can't meet the capital requirements. So a lot of good things have happened on that front. And I think you're going to see progress soon. But the proof's in the pudding, right? We've got to be able to build these things. We've had one really good year of intentions. Directionally, all very positive. There's an incredible amount of support for the government that exists. But as I remind them, A, I'm not your comms department, but B, I work for people who measure the outcomes. So all of that sounds lovely. Let me know when we built the pipeline. Let me know when we've reduced the amount of time it's taken to get to the critical minerals, which India is very focused on. They have a keen interest on our critical minerals, but most of them are in the ground. And they will be there for the next 10 to 20 years under the current regulatory regime that we're in. So that urgency that we speak about is not being matched in execution on policy action. We even have a legislation that was brought forth that said we're going to identify national projects. We haven't identified a single national project yet. We have the capacity to do things. We need to move quicker to do those things. I will say this about the Prime Minister. He's a man in a hurry. You know, we've known him a long time. We go back several decades. And, you know, this moment is made for him. It's a crisis. There's an opportunity here. He's a relationship person. He's a thoughtful person. He's obviously an intellectual and all of that. But he's impatient now. And I think he's frustrated by a year of saying, okay, I've done a lot of things here, but the federation that is Canada is very hard to govern, very hard to manage. And he's seeing that up front. You can't force people to do things. You can't tell people to deploy capital. You can't tell provinces what to do. You got to figure out a way to control those outcomes. Lastly, on the diaspora, let me just say one more thing about the Prime Minister. He has really no understanding or awareness or, frankly, interest in diaspora politics from any part of the world. It's just not who he is. He's an economic guy. He's a finance guy. He's obviously keen on foreign policy and trade and so forth. But he has no appreciation nor interest, nor I think will go out of his way to learn about all these diaspora politics. He's an Irish guy, right? He comes from Ireland. They have their own diaspora politics that they're focused on back there. So I don't see him getting engaged in this stuff, and I see him so far pushing back on it. So any attempt by his own caucus and others to say, we don't agree with you on this country or in Saudi Arabia or in China and other places, it's almost like, yeah, I've heard you, we're doing it. And that's what's happening. And so that's leadership in action, in my opinion.
The lack of engagement in diaspora politics might actually be a very good thing.
100%.
Might be just what the doctor.
I don't even know what I don't know. It's a perfect place to be.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Goldy. Nadir, a last question for you, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A from our viewers. And there are plenty of questions. This topic generates a lot of curiosity, so we will have a lot of questions coming up shortly. But let me ask you this. You know, no conversation in today's day and age is complete without referencing AI. So I do want to mention the Canadian AI Minister, Evan Solomon, when he went to India recently in February for the India AI Summit. He talked about Canada and India being natural technology allies, and he praised India's inclusive approach to AI. But the question I have for you is, I guess it's a twofold question. The first is, can India really be a linchpin for technology collaboration? We recently saw a trilateral agreement being signed on critical minerals as well as on technology between Canada, India, and Australia. So can India really be that linchpin in the tech relationship? And second, given that AI is hitting the India IT services industry, and we don't know how that will shake out. It's an opportunity, but it's also at the same time a threat. Witness the fact that India's IT services companies have taken a battering in their stock prices in the past 3 or 4 months. And as I think our previous speakers talked about, services exports in the technology side are a significant component of India's exports to Canada. So given that India's tech services companies are grappling with AI, will India and Canada really, truly be able to collaborate on AI moving forward?
I think if you take a step back before, deep tech, emerging tech, AI, even a few years ago, one of those marquee areas of potential cooperation between Canada and India was technology, emerging technology, deep technology. We have a very, very robust tech ecosystem now amplified through our capacity and capabilities in the AI, the rise of AI. India has long had a very, very robust ecosystem as it relates to technology. And if you look at India's initiatives in the startup front over the last several years, under the Modi government in particular, it's quite impressive. Yet it has been an area that was extrapolated in the context of the bilateral relationship. So absolutely, yes, it does have the potential to be a very significant marquee element in the Canada-India relationship. And if you look at what's happening with respect to AI ecosystem capacity, talent in Canada and in India, I can't think of a better fit. And then, of course, the trilateral cooperation opportunities, whether it's Australia, whether it's what's happening in Silicon Valley. Canada is very tied to Silicon Valley in many ways. And so, so there's an opportunity for even more trilateral cooperation and how you leverage that. Now, this comment around or the thinking around what does this mean for the services trade as it relates to some of the top tech companies in India. I think, you know, there are two schools of thought on that AI is going to have a significant impact on the number of employees and talent and what that means.
Yes.
But the other school of thought on that is, no, it won't. It just requires a different type of skilling, learning, and so, you know, and you take that, whether it's India or anywhere else, that argument or that, you know, back and forth is going to be prevalent. A couple of things that I think are noteworthy when you think a little bit about what's happening with respect to talent. A number of not just Canadian, but other global institutions continue to set up global capability centers in India.
Yes.
And it's not driven by cost efficiencies. It's not driven by, you know, optimizing resources. It's driven by talent. The talent that's available in India is just not available in places like Canada as it relates to some of these emerging and deep technology engineering ecosystems. So if anything, I think it does, you know, I agree with Minister Solomon that it has the potential to be a very significant underpinning sector with respect to the Canada-India relationship. But also, India has something that it's offering Canada and other countries that I think has the potential to grow even further. The only other thing I'll use this as an example to maybe touch on something that both Veena and Goldy are talking about. And I think the pathway to growth in the relationship is through exploring deep collaboration in new sectors where we haven't done a whole lot before. If all we're going to do is focus on the same areas, you know, more potash or more, you know, coking coal, or, you know, let's do uranium again, that's great. That'll certainly have impact. When we start thinking about critical minerals, we think about expanding the oil and gas ecosystem. We think about not just agri-food as it relates to exports from Canada, but agricultural technology collaboration, optimizing crop yields, helping farmers grow more, and leveraging sort of using the use of technology. When we think a little bit about services, as Veena pointed out, it's not just education, it's engineering firms and other opportunities to grow those services, infrastructure, biotech, areas where we haven't done a whole lot before. What you're talking about in terms of AI and the tech ecosystem is one of many areas of potential cooperation. Defense is another. And it was very, very heartening to see that Prime Minister Carney is focused on a number of these other sectors. That's what's going to take us from 15 billion to 50 billion, or whatever our target's going to get to. That's why the free trade negotiations, the comprehensive economic agreement negotiations, are really critical. It's not about leveraging those existing sectors. It's about creating opportunities for new sectors to grow. And it's also why I'm very optimistic that we will, in fact, hit those numbers. But I wouldn't have been as optimistic a few years ago.
Thank you. Thank you, Nadir. Let me open it up to questions from the audience. And like I said, there are plenty of questions, but I'm going to select some and then paraphrase. This question is for any of you or all of you, because all of you definitely perhaps not only can, but would perhaps want to comment on it. You know, trust has been damaged between the United States and India, notwithstanding all of the recent bonhomie and niceties and, you know, pleasantries exchanged. A fundamental trust that existed in the US-India relationship has been damaged. Perhaps the same could be said of US-Canada and US and other countries as well. But has the same occurred between Canada and India, notwithstanding the recent rapprochement? So is the Canada-India relationship on a footing where it's inexorably moving forward and upward, or is there a possibility of it slipping back? Any of you that wants to answer?
I'll jump in. I thought either one of them would jump in quicker than I did. So let me just say very briefly that, look, it's relationships diplomatically are like marriages. Of course, there's going to be challenges. Of course, there's going to be risks. You got to work at it, right? You've got to work at it. You've got to fight through some of that adversity. There are people out there who don't want to see this relationship be a success. And you can bet they will create mischief and noise to try and disrupt that relationship. And we've got to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I think it's going to be, as long as certainly Prime Minister Carney and Prime Minister Modi are there, they've made it very clear they're not going to let it happen. They're going to stay focused on that. But we live in democracies and they're not going to govern forever. So we want to make sure that these relationships outlast just two particular individuals. And so I think it's a very important question, but trust is built over time. I mean, lost very quickly, but it's built over time, and the relationship takes work. So I do think that, and you've seen it, right? The breakup between Modi and Trump, who's, I guess we're his warm-up act in 9 minutes he's starting, President Trump. That was unbelievable to see. To me, one of the most significant geopolitical visuals I have seen in a very long time is to see Prime Minister Modi with President Putin, President Xi, all having a great laugh, holding hands. I'm like, boy, if you ever wanted proof of my enemy's enemy's my friend, here you go. So trust can be broken, and then you pay price for that.
Right.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Veena.
Yeah, no, I'll be brief, because I agree with Goldy that the two leaders obviously will be driving this relationship for the foreseeable future, but we do need to reinforce it by building a trust more broadly. And I would say we're not there yet, and we have survey data to show that, but it will take time to rebuild it. And I think that's why business, people to people, universities, media engagement, all of that is necessary as we move on the political reset. So I think right now it's not there, but that's okay, because we do have the political will, and political will is opening up a lot of doors. It's moving, but we need to rebuild it. And if I may, just one point that Nadir mentioned, and on the defense industrial cooperation, I think that is a huge area that we should really be focusing on. And it was really heartening to see our defense minister on the trip with Prime Minister Carney, and he met with a number of industry officials there. We at APFC have been doing track 1.5 dialogues. Our last one was in this sector. And again, it shows the level of ambition in the relationship, right? It would have been impossible to imagine a year ago that we would be talking about defense cooperation with India. And we're moving. So I guess and that also speaks to trust, that the ambition is there to have a relationship that is actually mutual, that's built on mutual trust. And in fact, that's what Prime Minister Modi said in his press briefing standing next to Prime Minister Carney, that the reason we're talking about defense is to show that the relationship has this deep foundation of trust. So I think the aspiration is there, but we have a lot of work to do, and we shouldn't take it for granted. And this is where organizations such as yours also play a role.
Yeah, the only thing
For people of goodwill, as pertains to this relationship, as all of us are, we are moving in the right direction, and that's very heartening after what has just happened in the recent past. So that's wonderful. Nadir, you want to jump in on this one?
I'll just briefly say, if you look at the relationship over a long period of time, the relationship is far more resilient than it is fragile over a long period of time. Yes, there are issues. There will always be issues, but that's whether it's Canada, India, Canada, US, there will always be issues. The question is, do we have more in common in terms of interests than we do differences? And the answer to that is yes. So I'm not as concerned about the relationship being fragile. I think it's deeply resilient. And I think, we don't want to downplay events of the last couple of years, but I also look at those as not a reflection of what the long haul relationship has been and can continue to be. And I think to some extent, the deep-rooted ties between the diaspora communities, Canada, India, I think are one of the reasons for that, among others. And I think that's something that we need to think about. I think the bigger concern I've got is not about whether the relationship is fragile. It's something that Goldy touched on earlier, and that is the prime ministers have a vision that's up here. The ability of the system, whether it's diplomats, government, political meetings, businesses, to execute on that vision and keep pace with where the prime ministers are, that will be a bigger challenge than risking some backtracking in the relationship. So.
Fair point, Nadir. Thank you. And you speak with a lot of experience behind you, given your senior roles in the Canadian Foreign Ministry. So appreciate the point you're making, and that Goldy made earlier on that too as well. One other audience question I want to read out. And again, this is for any of you or all of you that want to jump in. With the restoration of high commissioners, Prime Minister Carney's visit, and CEPA negotiations now back on track, what should be the first 3 tangible deliverables over the next 12 months to ensure that the Canada-India reset moves beyond symbolism?
Well, let me just start with a couple of quick ones. So the comprehensive trade agreements get the deal done in principle. It'll take a while to sort of, fine tune it, get it ratified, but get a deal done in principle. It's within reach. If the EU India deal is an example, and there's so many other recent changes in terms of policy posture, it's certainly within reach. That would be a very significant step forward. The second thing is there's a lot more that, and I want to pick up on something that Goldy talked about. Our Prime Minister has outlined a vision and taken steps around big projects in Canada. We have a major projects office. We have significant plans in place to build things, including in the energy space or critical mineral space, that could be beneficial for India. We need to demonstrate progress, build something big that can have impact in India through some type of new export opportunity or whatever it might be. I think that's going to be a very, very important one. Those are two. I'll let Goldy and Veena add another one or two.
Yeah, I would just note, Sanjeev, and for your listeners, that we do have a roadmap that the two governments put in place that has some specific things that they'd like to see. So SEPA is obviously one of them, but we also now have a commitment to reimagine our education and talent relationships. So a new talent strategy, that would be great to have that before our two prime ministers meet again, possibly before the end of the year. So we kind of have the 6 months deadline ahead of us, right, between now and the end of the year to get a SEPA negotiation finalized, to have a new talent strategy that moves us beyond just having foreign students, but actually to potentially doing things around skills building and having Canadian institutions operating in India. And I'd also like to see some big investments, either in Canada or in India. So two-way investment, really moving that up. I think that would go a long way. And then if we can maintain the kind of the level of engagement at the minister's level, at the officials level, I think that in itself is already an achievement, because in the last 6 months, the tempo of these visits and meetings has been really robust. And I'd like to see it sustained at least for another year to be able to continue to cement that reset that the two leaders started.
Well, I agree with all of that. When you go last, you don't have to say anything more than ditto. I will only add one other thing that comes to mind. And that is, it's not just about the bilateral relationship. Do others want to work with us? And I'm very encouraged to see an initiative underway right now with India, Canada, including Australia, around defense, for example. So it's a great example of, to some extent, the Prime Minister's middle powers, concept that he's floated out there in Davos, coming together in various different shapes and forms. So it's good to see that people want to work with us when we're working with each other.
By the way, come August in India, in New Delhi, Indiaspora is in the early stages at the moment of planning an event around the trilateral between Australia, Canada, and India. And we will be talking to the two high commissioners of Australia and Canada in New Delhi on this subject. We've already commenced those conversations with these two gentlemen who we know. So if any of you wish to be, or any of our listeners wish to be part of this event in Delhi, we'd be delighted to welcome you. We'll keep you posted. All right. We are at time. So one last question, and this is not coming from the audience really, but it's just me thinking about something that was alluded to earlier in the conversation, which is on the education sector. In one of my questions, I mentioned Indian students coming to Canada, but I want to reverse the frame now. Given India's NEP, or new education policy, given that all three of you are affiliated with different Canadian, or have been affiliated with different Canadian universities, my question for you is, what is the appetite among Canadian universities to engage in India and with India, and perhaps even set up campuses and collaborative, degrees and so on and so forth?
That's a question for
well, I can, sure, happy to jump in. The appetite is very much there, short answer. We had 20 university presidents from Canada visiting India in February. We had a delegation from colleges in Canada there just last week. So there is a huge interest. I mean, obviously, transnational education is just one model, and we're looking at the business case for that. And there's a couple of Canadian universities who are looking at it more seriously. There's also a few programs that have been set up, for instance, around AI, which was announced during Prime Minister's visit. But it's something that's currently in kind of discussions around what the big picture will look like, because there are some universities that are moving and it's encouraging. There are some programs around AI and nursing program, and it's something that's happening organically by individual universities, but also there's now some conversation about bringing it all together. The one disadvantage is in Canada, we don't have kind of a ministry in Ottawa that's a Ministry of Education that can look at the big picture strategy. So it's a little bit more dispersed, I guess, at the provincial level and left to individual universities. But I think we are seeing efforts to take advantage of the changes in the domestic laws in India, as well as obviously to find a new way of working now that the old model of just relying on foreign students has run its course. And I think, frankly, this is also part of the discussions around CEPA, what the talent strategy will look like, what our partnerships will look like. And I am encouraged by the early conversations, but we'll see where the discussions go in the next 6 months.
I think some of this is being driven by necessity as well, right? That we do have a crisis in Canada around the foreign student issue. We have lost a lot of Indian students who have gone back. And we know that India wants to send a lot of its students abroad. But I think this is a classic case of Muhammad in the mountain to some extent. And you're going to see, and I was just in Maharashtra where we met with the chief minister there, and some academic leaders were there at the same time. The emphasis that the chief minister is putting on building greenfield campuses, custom-made, designed to accommodate your needs for Canadian institutions, will attract, I think, these institutions to say, look, if this is the kind of capacity that's going to exist here, and students are willing to get their Canadian education in India, I suspect for less money than they would have to pay for it in Canada. When you have 1.4 billion people, there's a lot of market. You don't have to have everybody come over here. And so I think you're going to see a lot more of that, quite frankly.
Right. Nadir, I think we can't hear you. Are you on mute?
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Just one thing to add on education. We focus so much on foreign students from India studying in Canada, or, when we talk about campuses, satellite campuses, Canadian students or universities supporting education in India. But the relationship as it relates to education is and can be and should be much more multifaceted than that. There's research collaboration between institutions. There's faculty exchanges, executive education, continuing education programs, alumni, leveraging Canada's alumni network in India as ambassadors for greater trade, investment, and other opportunities. So we need to think a little bit about more of a comprehensive education strategy that goes beyond students back and forth. It's just something to think about.
Great final comment in your leadership position at Wilfrid Laurier, Nadir. Appreciate that. This has been an outstanding panel. I mean, I have learned so much, despite myself being a keen observer of Canada and Canada-India ties, and given my own past at the Rotman School in Toronto in Canada. It's a country that I follow, but, just in this conversation in the past hour, I've learned so much myself. So really appreciate the expertise from all of you and your insights and perspectives. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Let me turn it over now to Neha to close the event.
Yes, wow, what an engaging conversation, honestly. Couldn't agree with Sanjeev more in terms of what we learned. I think some of the things that I was hearing was, I believe, Goldy, you mentioned diplomatic relationships are like marriages. Of course, there's challenges, but, as Veena said, there's a lot of aspiration to move forward. And organizations such as Indiaspora, Nadir, you mentioned, will help strengthen that and keep that moving forward. And as Sanjeev mentioned, one of the examples is we have an event that we're doing in India regarding the trilateral relationship between Canada, India, and Australia. So truly very, very special having you here. Your time is valuable, and thank you for giving us that. This feels less like a conclusion and more like the start of many other conversations. So thank you for being here, and thank you to the attendees. There was a lot of interest from you, so we'll keep those conversations moving. Thank you for being here tonight, and look forward to many more conversations. Have a good evening.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.